Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Supply Chain. Last week was episode 2 in our 4-part Quickbase mini series, and I was joined by Alex Pedersen to explore the solar industry on the show called Control. We talked all about the increasing importance of generating renewable energy sources, the challenges of ensuring efficiency and connectivity whilst meeting high demand, the power of low code development in complex industries, and exactly how Quickbase can centralize scattered workflows to help scale your operations quickly, safely, and securely. Quickbase helps customers see, connect, and control complex projects that reshape our world. Whether it's raising a skyscraper or coordinating vaccine rollouts, the no code software platform allows business users to custom fit solutions to the way they work, using information from across the systems they already have. So, today in episode 3, Connect, we'll be discussing the complex world of construction, the challenges of keeping projects on time and budget amidst supply chain and labor disruption, the importance of building stakeholder trust, and exactly how Quickbase can equip your team with real time information to streamline processes, ensure compliance, and improve communication. So, welcome to the show, Jacob.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. This is a really big topic because I have come up with so many stories about the construction industry with all the supply chain disruptions. And we talked about solar last week. And again, we're getting into construction this week. It's just another industry that we haven't talked too much about on the show, but it's
Cool.
another one that's absolutely fascinating. And if we think supply chain is crazy, construction has to be right up there with it when it comes to challenges and risk. I'm really excited to find out more. So, we are just going to dive in. Let's kick things off by getting into your background a little bit because I know you have a lot of experience in the industry. In fact, I think you previously worked at a construction company. So, tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. I actually started in construction when I was like a kid,
Wow.
like really young, just working, with my father in the field, and yeah, residential and commercial, light commercial, and that sort of thing. And then um, after college, I got into a position just called a project engineer that on some heavy civil and highway projects. Then got into wastewater and water treatment production, and then went into high tech, so semiconductor fabs, and for Intel, working on some of the largest projects in the world. So that was pretty cool. I spent I think about 15 years in the industry. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah,
Those are fascinating industries, especially right now,
yeah,
right? The semiconductor industry and wastewater. Because actually, I was just hearing about wastewater and the pandemic the other
yeah.
day, which I didn't even know was a thing
It's
until
crazy.
now. And I'm
Yeah,
only hearing it like 2 years later. So that's absolutely fascinating. But during that time, that's actually how you discovered Quickbase, right? I mean, I think
right.
you were a customer. We had Alex on the show last week, and he had a very similar story.
Yep.
What is it you love so much about Quickbase that it made you actually want to join them and then combine your industry experience with their technology to really help others? Because I think it's just fascinating that you and Alex kind of did the exact same thing. You were customers, you believed in it so much that you transitioned over. So I'd love to hear your story about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was, I never planned it. I mean, I thought I would be a career, construction manager, and with that job comes a lot of software. You have to be involved in software, whether you like it or not. And I think a
Right.
lot of folks don't. I think a lot of folks don't like it. They said, I got into construction because I want to build. I want to be out in the field, and I don't want to
Right.
sit at a computer. But but I did have sort of one foot in the software side of it, and got to know the systems, and I found them to be cumbersome and brittle and kind of awful. And of course, I was just looking for solutions, looking for something that would make that better. It seemed like to me at the time it was something like I think 2012, and I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. But with all the technology out there, how are we still working on systems that were developed in like the 70s?
Right.
And so, so I think that's where, and then that's where I found Quickbase. I inherited an Access database that I had to kind of figure out, um, and I thought, no, there has to be some other way. And it took some convincing to folks around me, my leadership, and that sort of thing. But eventually um, fell in love with it. Like just really used it for everything. It turned in, what we wanted to use it for was just tracking some pipe. It was literally called pipe track. We were tracking,
Right.
um, half-inch pipe that were high purity for gases and that sort of thing in the semiconductor facility, all the way up to 60-inch massive steel pipe that has to be shipped from across the world. So all that pipe has to be tracked. And so we had this old Access database that I ended up hating, and then saying we got to fix this, and so found Quickbase, and then it went from tracking pipe to doing all sorts of things. Then you find other places where, man, we can make a lot better because of the fact that we can do this ourselves. We there's plenty of opportunity. So
Right. Tell me a little bit about some of those other opportunities. So you went from tracking pipe to then what with the QuickBase system?
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of and a lot of what we may talk about later too is that difficulties in the supply chain come down to difficulties in communication. And so
Yes.
when you want to track pipe, what you're really wanting to do is track the information and the communication between the parties involved. And the more hands in the pot, the more that it gets confusing. And so tracking things like pipe, but really, you zoom out a little bit. It's just about trying to control the flow of information. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so RFIs and submittals, and used to use working with just paper only, that can be okay. But when you need kind of a roll up of all of that, or you need to find out where things are going and why they're stuck in whatever they're at, you've got to come up with a solution that's usually for these larger projects custom every time. You're not going to find
Yeah.
software off the shelf that does exactly what you need. So yeah, so it was a good find, and the actual pivot over to Quickbase again wasn't planned, but it was after using it for a couple of years, and then I actually moved over to an electric utility. I went from sort of that construction proper to an electric utility who are often a construction company themselves within a
Right.
utility because they have to do so much work on their own facilities. So I moved companies, and then I thought I can use Quickbase here too, and
Nice.
because I've got this new tool in my tool belt, and so we started using it there, and then I think I spoke at a conference or something and met a friend that said, hey, you should come work for Quickbase, and I thought, wow, that's a pivot, but it was good. It's been great.
That's great. And I think when you said 2012, you kind of started questioning things. I think that's the time when everybody started questioning everything.
Probably, yeah, that sounds right. Yeah,
Well, and I love the fact that QuickBase was able to follow you into different projects, into different companies, and really provide a solution every time that happened. I mean, that is something that is kind of gold,
yeah,
right? And like you said, having an opportunity to really pivot and flex is a huge component of technology and software, especially when you're talking about supply chain, because supply chain is changing. I mean, it's sort of changed on its head over the last couple of years, and you need some technology that can keep up with that, right?
that's right.
So,
That's
before
exactly
we
right.
dive into the solutions that you're bringing to your customers, let's talk about their challenges. Construction is another industry that was hit really hard by the pandemic. We saw materials in short supply, so the cost of those materials are rising even still. And of course, there were the obvious safety concerns around social distancing for workers. So, what are some of the common challenges looking like now that we've seen kind of the worst of the pandemic?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think those challenges always existed. They always were there, but they kind of lurked, maybe behind other challenges. So now the supply chain challenges specifically, they're always an issue with long lead times. Construction projects, at least the larger ones, you'll have a handful of components that take 6 months to procure, and or even longer. And so those are always, we kind of always knew those existed, and so you get ahead of those really quickly. What I think changed in the last couple of years is that now it's not just those, it's almost everything that's at
Everything.
risk. It's all, everything you would want to buy is at risk. Things that you wouldn't even think about, like toilet paper, right? So
Right.
things that it just surprised the world. And so now, so the planning and procurement specialists that would get into a project way ahead of time, even during the design phase, knew to target specific, you know, components. Now they have to target a lot more, and so I think that's a huge challenge, because you never really know which other component will come around the corner and go, oh, we're short on that, or
Right.
the cost has tripled.
Yeah.
And so they're always, it feels probably like they're always on their heels a little bit with that.
Yeah, and it makes planning really, really difficult,
Yeah,
right? And I think sometimes also in construction, your customers don't necessarily realize what's going on in the back end and what's happening with supply chain that is going to affect and cause that sort of ripple effect that we've kind of seen. Like I was talking on my live show, I think about 6 months ago, there was a story about sawdust and milk. So I didn't realize this, but in order to keep the cows comfortable for them to produce the milk, they need sawdust.
oh wow,
And so sawdust was in short supply and they started charging more for sawdust. And so that's why the cost of milk was going up even before all of this discussions around inflation and things like that. So there's several different components even within the construction industry that reflect onto other industries and what we as consumers are getting on the shelves in respect to like milk,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so it's really crazy how intertwined everything really is. And so the challenges that you're having in construction are really leaking and going into different aspects of, food and things that we wouldn't even really think about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's making us all a little bit more painfully aware of how this all works,
Yep,
whether we like it or not. um,
absolutely.
but yeah, yeah,
So, from your experience, what do you think could help you better predict some of those project delays, reduce some of those supply chain costs, the fines? Maybe you want to define what some of the fines could be as well, because I never really thought about fines or compliance violations and the impact that they have and how big that really is.
yeah. There are delay uh, charges that a project can incur that are daily, after the project end date was agreed to, sometimes years in advance, especially for the larger projects, right? So we have to be done October 31st, with
Right.
this project, and every day after that, you're going to incur those fees or fines. And so the project teams together work on trying to make sure that doesn't happen. But with supply chain issues, there's not a lot you can do, and then of course it
Yeah.
becomes a legal thing where you try to put enough language in the contracts to handle all of that. But again, that is really tough to predict. It's tough to get everybody to agree. Yeah, if there's supply chain issues, I can't perform to that date. And then the owner would say, well, I need you to. I don't. I have another contractor over here that say they can. And so it's a tough. It's a very competitive environment, to
Mhm.
try to construct these massive projects, engineer and design them in the first place, with the right sort of constructability um, and those supply chain bottlenecks in mind, because a lot of times they're looking out 2 3 years. We're going to design this project and start building next year, and then it will be finished 2 years after that. Well, how
Right.
can you predict what the supply chain issues will
Mhm.
be then? So that's why contractors are at risk. I mean, they are. It's a risky business because they're putting their necks out on the line for some of these projects. And yeah, I mean, to get to being able to better predict it, I think that the planners, the people that do this work, that get ahead of some of the procurement actions that they have to take, they need better tools. This is kind of where, where
Yeah.
QuickBase can come in. They have a lot of times you'll find them just kind of tracking things in spreadsheets. When it comes down to it, they've got their major systems, but the only other thing they have are spreadsheets, and so there's kind of nothing in the middle to give that robust connection.
I think I just heard the whole audience go, "No," to Excel and planning in Excel. I think I
Yeah,
just heard that.
yeah.
But going back to those fines, they can be pretty big fines, right? I think we're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars a day.
Project, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So yeah, you try to, and not even to mention the dollars. I mean, you don't want to be the contractor that caused um, Intel to not release their their fab that they hit the presses with a long time
No
ago.
kidding.
So you don't want to be anywhere near that headline. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I think another really important aspect that you just mentioned are contracts. I think if you're not looking at your contracts right now very thoroughly, in the fact that maybe they haven't changed since before the pandemic, and you really, really need to take a look at them right now because the language and everything that it covered pre pandemic
yeah,
needs to be changed. And so that comes into contracts, negotiation, that's on the logistics side, that's on the construction side. There's so many aspects to the contracts that you deal with on a day-to-day basis
yep.
that I would implore everybody to take a closer look at. And then by saying that, let's take a closer look then at QuickBase's construction management software. What can it do and how does it help address some of the challenges that we've been talking about?
Yeah, yeah, and I think I accidentally led into it just there. So, the difference between sort of your what we call tier one systems, your ERP, your financial systems, those especially for the larger firms, those stay put. They are what they are, and you kind of have to deal with them as they are.
Hmm.
And then, like I said, in the field, in the job site trailers where you've got engineers and project managers and whatnot trying to wrangle all of this together. You've got really no other tools. You've got those core systems, and then, like I said, Excel. It's kind of like and I actually watched several really smart project engineers learn Visual Basic so that they could create macros inside of Excel. So they're like
Wow.
trying to build software because of the fact that there was literally just no other option. So people that didn't plan on getting into software were learning code in order to wrangle Access databases and Excel sheets, and that's the gap that sort of exists today, and I think still exists in many cases. Um, and so yeah, so we come in sort of in that middle, and we try to bridge and fill that gap and say that you should be using Excel for certain things for sure, but at any point where it starts to become there's a workflow involved, there's rules involved that you want people to adhere to, and you don't want everybody to have access to it, or you want them to only have access to certain rows, right? It becomes more complicated, and you can probably do some of it with Excel. And I've seen some Excel sheets that are people are trying to build whole entire platforms on Excel, and it's just the
Wow.
wrong it's the wrong thing to do. But you can tell there's a desperation for something for just to go fill that gap. And so we do everything in that middle. It has to be sort of a flexible middle because what the field needs changes from project to project many times. Because the difference between having a crew of 15 and a crew of 1500 is so different that software or whatever
Yeah.
workflow that you have to deal with, it has to flex. So we provide a platform. Provide a platform that just bridges whatever gap, whatever the size and shape gap that exists between those two systems. We'll call it sort of tier one and tier three. Kind of fit in that tier two right in the middle.
Well, and you're allowing them to go back to what they're good at and what they're
Yes,
getting paid to do. I mean, at the
that's
end of the day, you're taking so much time away by trying to, create those macros and
yes,
sort of develop your own software and learn code and things like that. You're taking them away from what they do best.
yep,
And that's what we want a technology company or a technology to help with, software to help with, is to really get people back into what they should be doing in the first place and not going off in different aspects and making it really easy so that they don't have to learn. And that's what I've learned over this mini series is that QuickBase's software, whether it's for construction or solar or anything, is really, really easy to use. So what kind of customers are you working with? Is there a typical customer for you? Like what size do I have to be? What does that look like?
So yeah, that's a good question. It's really not, there isn't really a typical. We've been around for a long time. So we have, you know, owner operators that have 10 employees, and we
Okay.
work with half of the Fortune 100. So we have a huge range of customers that need that flexible middle, software built by the business, we'll say.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that in the construction, industry, we see everything from the subcontractors that are, and that's where I started. We were a subcontractor, a mechanical subcontractor. We were, 300 employees. I think that they're maybe 1,000 now, and they still use QuickBase after all these years, which is kind of cool. And
Amazing.
yeah, I would say that's typical. And some of the larger what ended up happening there actually is that because like I said earlier, these this industry is competitive. It's also competitive in a way that's um, back and forth. They will share as well. It's like, oh, I heard you're using this, and so even though I compete with you now, I want to see where you're at. I want to see what you're doing, and so it kind
Right.
of spread from mechanical firm to mechanical firm, even though they try to keep things under lock and key. It's like, what are you using? So that was kind of cool to see that it spreads around the job site, if you will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, word of mouth is a great way to get new business. And it just goes to show how important that system is to their business and how technology can really become a competitive advantage. So now we've talked about how the QuickBase system can sort of cover some of those gaps, but I'm sure in some of the research that I did for this episode, there's a lot of documentation that goes in construction. I'm from the logistics industry, and there's a lot of documentation in logistics. And so I understand how, getting the information from the documents, being connected, having good data, having communication can be really something that can take you to the next level, right? And of course, in construction, you've got schedules, contracts, orders, you're pulling in suppliers, contractors, customers. I mean, it's so complex. There's so many people, but it's vital that the details are right, right? Because misinformation or incorrect data could lead to literally disaster.
Yeah.
So, how does that decentralized work, and how do you achieve the balance of that software being flexible, but also robust enough to house and manage such complex and sort of ever changing data in secure and manageable way?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I would say we've got sort of two angles at that. For one side of it, for IT, we'll say for IT proper, we need to make sure that they know that their data is secure, just like you said, but that it also is governed well. So we give a number of features that allow what I would say the IT governance or policies to be adhered to from just an IT perspective that says, hey, I'm okay with you doing XYZ in QuickBase, but really don't go outside of that because that's
Right.
that's what should be over here in the system, or let's not duplicate it, data as well. That's one aspect, and we give, like I said, we have a ton of features that allow sort of that governance model to be adhered to, whatever it is. It can be different from each company, but usually there's a few controls that IT wants, and so we provide those. Um, and on the other side, the flexibility side, the business is as long as they understand what those rules are, as long as they know what are the policies, what are the things that I can put into QuickBase, then we make it flexible on their side too, to sort of manage and govern within the patch of grass that they've been given, essentially. So yeah, there's a handful of things that we have, and in a data sense, we're terribly secure. We hit 100% on our security scorecard just recently. We
Amazing.
we have yeah we have a really secure platform, and when people get nervous about where their data goes, I always remind them of it's all going to Excel right now, and
Right.
Excel, and email is going to be where you have your problems, and so
Yep.
if you're aiming for perfection, it's probably a good thing, but recognize where you are now. People are taking your system, the data out of your ERP, dumping it into Excel, and then
Mm,
doing whatever they are with it, and then sharing it with people. So that
yeah.
that's not secure, or governed in any way. But people just sort of overlook that, interestingly. So
That is such a good point, and I haven't really ever really thought about that. I mean, at the end of the day, you're putting it into Excel, you're sharing it with people, and depending on how you're sharing it and how secure that is, it might not be secure at all because we all know that email is very hackable,
yeah,
right?
that's exactly right.
So, obviously, visibility, connectivity is key to efficiency and productivity in the construction industry, but really in any industry. But what I really like about the Quickbase approach is that you also talk about trust. Projects aren't just about documents and materials, they're really about people. I mean, supply chain is about people too. So, why is it so important to look towards genuine collaboration and build those long-term relationships?
Yeah, that's I think that's probably the best answer, to you asking earlier how I made a pivot in my career.
Yeah.
We build builders, so we find people that want to construct, actual physical, our built environment, and we find that they are stuck on a computer. And you kind of mentioned, got to get them back to doing what they were doing. And,
Yeah.
not to mention that they're miserable doing, the thing that they didn't plan on doing.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that the relationship building there, is cool because we've got people that want to have this solution. They don't, they end up being very thankful. Like, I'm so thankful I found this because now I can kind of, like you said, I can go back to doing what I'm doing. We see, an interesting number of I work with like brand new customers, to get them started on their first, my team does, the brand new customers, get them started on their first application. And we often see in that first, whatever it is, a few weeks, few months, or a year, promotions. We see people, because if we
Huh.
find those people that want to build on Quickbase, they solve those things. They go, they make waves at their company, and they so we end up making friends for life in those cases, right? Where it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I got promoted, now I do this, and that, and I was able to innovate here, and kind of show off what I was able to do because, before that, I was sort of the recipient of software, and then I
Right.
turned into someone that could actually make these workflows, and that surprised my boss, and then I was able to kind of get, promoted. So that's one of the, like, best feelings in the world, and one of the coolest parts of my job.
I love that story, especially when you're taking a software solution and helping people to excel, not only personally, but also professionally as
Yeah.
well. I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure you have so many more great customer stories. Can you share maybe one or two with us? What was the customer's challenge specifically? Which of the solutions were they working with, and what was that impact or ROI of that solution? I mean, obviously to somebody's career, like we just talked about, but to the business itself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's so many projects and applications, in mind, and in my past. And one comes to mind that where, in our region, I'm in Portland, Oregon, and in our region, through the winter, there's typically, a fair bit of trees falling into power lines, right? So that
Okay.
happens a ton, and it knocks out power for neighborhoods. And in some cases, um, if you knock out power in the right sort of, uh, pattern, you can knock out a whole substation because the power kind of gets overloaded and it overloads the grid. And, um,
Wow.
so trees are a problem. Trees are, overgrowing into the lines, and then a branch, and in some cases it's a squirrel or whatever it is. It's taking out, like, the grid, and you see it all the time. Every industry, deals with stuff like that, but this, particularly in the Northwest. And they need to trim these trees. They need to get the trees away from, these lines, and it takes a lot of effort through the year to make sure you've gotten ahead of all of it before the storms hit.
Right.
And so there's a coordination with the subcontractors and with, the homeowners, because sometimes there's easements and that's on their side of the property, right? And so, the coordination between, in this case, the public utility there, the subcontractor, the tree trimmer, and the homeowners is tough because there's not really software that can handle that. Like each
Hmm.
company has their own, and so QuickBase was able to kind of give a view of to the homeowners, to the subcontractors that are doing the work, and then to the utility of where do we need to go next. And there's a whole coordination there that needs to happen to keep those lines up and running. So that's where, like I said, it's a very custom shape that we kind of fit into, where we can be customer facing, or in this case, the resident facing, utility facing, and subcontractor facing with one application. So
And I'm sure they were able to be a little bit more proactive, right?
yeah, exactly. With all of that, then you suddenly get a view of what the most important things are. It's a little bit more real time instead of sending, instead of it going by email, or in some cases you'll have a call center that has to go call all of these people to figure out what's
Right.
going on. And so just better ways to do work, more efficient flow of information.
Work smarter, not harder. That's what I'm hearing.
That's right. That's
And I
exactly
love
right.
it. I love it. So if I'm listening to all of this, I'm in the audience, I'm listening, getting really excited at the thought of the impact on my business. How do I get started and what are the next steps?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's a bunch of ways you could get started. You can chat right from our website and just dive right in, and someone will help you. We have a really low key way of bringing people along, just hearing the problem and saying, okay, let me go off and go design you something really, really quickly, and then kind of show you exactly what we
Nice.
think you're saying.
Yeah.
So that can be a cool way to start, is just to allow someone to kind of design a little QuickBase app for you. We have a builder program that allows you to just for free go try out QuickBase.
Huh.
So you can go on and just, for a limited, yeah, you could go build apps, and we'd love to see what you build.
Hmm. I
So
love
yeah,
that. Can you imagine going on there and just being like, okay, this is what I need to do? And especially if you're already trying to do that in Excel, right? You could go
yes,
onto the website, go onto the builder,
yep,
put in kind of what you're already working on and see what kind of the next evolution of that could look like,
that's right.
which I really, really love. So, as we look to the future, the construction industry is only going to grow, right? So, where do you see the most opportunity?
Yeah, I think that the planning and sourcing of materials is only going to get more difficult. I think the
Right.
pandemic gave us kind of a window into how interconnected our world is, and um, I think that the big challenges there aren't over. I think the pandemic is lightening up on us, but I think now we're starting to see like what happened when that ship blocked the Suez Canal.
Yep.
It literally affected all of us, one
Mhm.
one boat. And so I think for the construction industry, there's some eye opening a little bit on, okay, so um, the amount of planning and the amount of efficiency that we need pre-project,
Mhm.
design phase, actually has to go up. And like I said, it's always kind of lurked. That's always been true, but
Yeah.
this just really ripped open the curtain and showed it's a major risk for these projects.
Yeah, and I highlighted an article a couple of weeks ago on my live show about an interior designer who was going to do some construction within their home. And what she actually did was she took a list of suppliers and figured out who had what in stock before she even started the project. Now, that takes sort of planning to the micro level from a consumer perspective, right?
Yeah,
But at the end of the day, there's a lot of learnings there because now we need to have access to more. We need to
yeah,
have access to more suppliers and multiple suppliers and where are we going to get our raw materials, where are we going to get our finished products, and what does that look like, what is the wait time, how can we plan around that? So I think planning pre-pandemic looks very different to planning post-pandemic.
fully
And
agree.
just a few things to sort of think about, and if you have a software that can really elevate that for you, I mean, it's a game changer, right?
Yeah, I think that the cool one of the cool parts about this sort of design your own software in this sense is not just that you get to fit it to the workflow, but that the moment you do it, you can actually start to reach out and have other people from other companies and other entities coordinate with you in the same application.
Nice.
That I think is really where we get the flow of information. Otherwise, it's bundle it up into an Excel, put it as an attachment, and email it over. But then now
Yeah.
what happens? And then what happens next? And it's kind of this really difficult. If we can get all together in the same app, then we're all eyes together. It's almost as if it takes the virtual environment and puts us all on the same table and says, okay, so the ball's now in your court, even though you're at a different company. And in many cases, like we have to deal with the government, and we have
Yeah.
municipalities, we have county, city, federal. They have terrible systems, and they cannot access. They can't provide the software that would handle all of this, but they can in some cases jump into a web application that just says, hey, can you just sign off on this? And so it opens up the ability to communicate between entities that I think in the past have had really hard times communicating.
Absolutely. I have somebody that I'm going to introduce you guys to after we finish this particular episode.
Cool.
So, finally, what's your key takeaway from everything we've talked about today and the importance of connecting people, workflows, and material when it comes to project success? Like, what do you think the audience should walk away thinking about from this conversation?
Well, I'd really love people to understand and get excited about at least trying out or considering no code, low code as a way to manage their work. Where in my past it was open up a spreadsheet and that's how I'm going to manage because that's just what's easy and it's in the buttons right in front of me. Take a moment and maybe try something else.
Absolutely. Such great advice. And that was so interesting. I mean, when you look at a construction project, there are literally thousands of moving parts, and agility, connectivity, that ability to have the right information and respond to it quickly and accurately is just so very vital. But if the processes are paper based and laborious, there's no standardization or centralization. You just can't do that, right?
That's right.
And then you're exposed to risk, delays, fines, compliance violations, all of which have a huge impact on your bottom line. So, to be able to address all of that with a solution like Quickbase that's flexible, less costly, and genuinely employee inspired is an absolute game changer. If you want to find out more, you can check them out at quickbase.com. A massive thanks to Jacob for joining me today
Sure.
and to the team at Quickbase for making this episode happen. And we'll be back next week for the fourth and final episode of our mini series where Peter Rifkin began the series, and he will be back again to round it out. This time, he'll be diving into the ins and outs of complex project management and explaining how you can level up information to leadership so you can make the best decisions for your operations. Jacob, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much again.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay.